This is the Iliad by Homer in the philosophy section. I've never been fond of excessive violence, especially in films. Saving Private Ryan didn't bother me because it showed what war was like in World War II. It wasn't glorifying violence by any stretch. Violence wasn't the entertainment, it was the horror in war. On the contrary, films like John Wick or Hostel have the violence take front and center. The films have no important message, theme, or revelation, I don't think. The story is centered around delivering shock and violence as the entertainment device. To be fair, movie lovers should really watch what they want. If excessive violence tickles their jollies, then by all means. I simply think there is a line. If violence naturally arises out of the story organically, then fine, but watching blood and gore to warm your belly at night is a little sadistic. Yes, the Iliad is an extremely violent story. It's about as violent as a story can be. I give it a pass on my personal tasteful violence in a story gauge because, well, the Iliad is about so much more than violence. The gruesome death and gore is exactly what war was like when men hacked each other to pieces in hand to hand combat. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't nice. No doubt, heroic tales were spun from great victories, and heroes rise into the challenges against foes, but there was always much more at stake. I mean, they didn't go to war for entertainment, they went for resources, they went for influence, and they went for survival. Great warriors, friends, and family members died terrible deaths. There was always the grief, the anguish, and the tragedy that partnered the glory, the spoils, and the victory. There was always a price for war. I was introduced to the War and Iliad in high school my senior year in an English class. Not that I finished the book. At 18 years of age, I was, well, too busy with other things like drinking malt liquor with friends, chasing girls, playing competitive sports. So serious scholarship would have to wait a little bit. I don't think there's any shame in postponing either. I think socialization is vital for personal growth. Although I think an ongoing and permanent substitution of Netflix for the written word is probably a less than optimal long term solution for character development. Certainly, the golden age of television has continued on after The Sopranos and The Wire and other great shows. For today, a multitude of outlets await our credit cards with thousands of hours of high quality documentaries, fiction adaptations, original television shows, and much more. Although I do believe cinema has been in more of a lull. Even so, the great written works provide us with a different view, conjured from our imagination and our introspection and our personal realizations. We can internalize the story. It leaves an imprint on our psyche that doesn't quite pass us like the image flashes of the screen. It's the difference between being shown a trick and being part of the trick. The great books bring us in to be a part of the performance. We are active participants in the story. If we meet the words halfway and with attention, then the truths are revealed for us to keep. I was excited to finally revisit the Iliad after many years. Meeting the story halfway revealed some truths that I wasn't ready to appreciate at 18, but I am today. The Iliad takes place about a year before the Odyssey begins, although it's difficult to say with certainty. Whereas the latter tale is more of a playful leer, meandering through harmonies and melodies, then kind of climaxing with a sort of cacophonous crescendo, the Iliad is a resounding bass war drum that plays throughout. It may turn quiet and loud during ebbs and flows of story, but it never really falters. Thum, 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 as the rhythm of your heart might sound as you charge the enemy front lines in battle. The Iliad is the war epic. Sit tight, youngins, and protect your sensitive parts. It's about to get savage. We begin our tale immersed in the Trojan War precipitated after the abduction of Helen, apparently the most beautiful woman in the world, by Paris, the Prince of Troy. Helen is married to Menelaus of Sparta, an Achaean, who takes up arms against the Trojans along with many of his allies to rescue his wife Helen. There is little plot beyond this for the remainder of the story. The Trojans and Achaeans trade blows and insults, advances and retreats, engage in single combats. They bury their fallen brothers and plot strategies. The end goal is group victory and individual honor. A critical passage in the story sees Paris and Menelaus fight in a kind of trial by combat, a single combat to end the war. The greatest Trojan warrior, Hector, pleads armies on both sides. Quote, "Hear me, Trojans, Achaeans geared for combat. Hear the challenge of Paris, the man who caused our long, hard campaign. He urges all the Trojans, all the Argives too, to lay their fine armor down on the fertile earth while Paris himself and the warrior Menelaus take the field between you and fight it out for Helen and all her wealth in single combat. And the one who proves the better man and wins, he'll take those treasures fairly, lead the woman home. The rest will seal in their blood binding pacts of friendship." End quote. Both armies lay down their arms and dismount their chariots to watch Paris and Menelaus man dance with weapons. With luck, someone will die and they can all go home to their families. Of course, it would not come to be. After flinging spears at each other with no critical strikes, Menelaus draws his sword, then shatters it on Paris's helmet. Now, without a weapon, Menelaus drags Paris by the horsehair crest on his helmet top, cinching the leather strap around his neck, strangling him. Paris is soon to die, if not for Aphrodite, who swoops in and cuts the strap, releasing her beloved Paris from the constriction around his neck. Menelaus springs forth with a spear, ready to finish Paris, only to see Aphrodite shroud him in mist and carry him safely off to his quarters. This isn't the only time we see the gods intervene in the Trojan War. After Diomedes, the Achaean god of Argos, stabs the goddess Aphrodite in the wrist in the midst of battle, Apollo beckons Ares to intervene. Quote, "Ares, Ares, destroyer of men, reeking blood, stormer of ramparts, can't you go and drag that man from the fighting? That daredevil Diomedes, he'd fight Father Zeus. He's just assaulted Love. He stabbed her wrist like something superhuman. He even charged at me." End quote. Ares, the god of war, with inspiration from Apollo, charges the lines alongside Hector, cutting down Achaeans with fury. More gods and goddesses enter the fray as Hera pleads with Athena. Quote, "What disaster, daughter of storming Zeus, tireless one Athena, how hollow our vow to Menelaus that he would sack the mighty walls of Troy before he sailed for home, if we let murderous Ares rampage on this way. Up now, set our minds on our own fighting, fury." End quote. Together they go to Olympus to discuss their plan with Zeus and to seek his blessing. Quote, "Father Zeus, look, aren't you incensed at Ares and all his brutal work? Killing so many brave Achaeans for no reason, not a shred of decency, just to wound my heart. While there they sit at their royal ease, exalting the goddess of love and Apollo, lord of the silver bow. They loose this maniac Ares. He has no sense of justice." End quote. Zeus gives them approval, and soon they are beckoning the Argives to stand and fight. Athena boards a chariot with Diomedes, who dared to challenge the gods, and charges at Ares. Quote, "The blood-smeared Ares was tearing off his gear, but Athena donned the dark helmet of death, so not even stark Ares could see her now." End quote. And then, quote, But Athena, her eyes of fire, grabbed the flying shaft, flicked it over the car, and off it flew for nothing. And after Diomedes yelled his war cry, lunging out with his own bronze spear, and Pallas Athena rammed it home, deep in Ares' bowels where the belt cinched him tight. There Diomedes aimed and stabbed. He gouged him down his glistening flesh and wrenched the spear back out, and the brazen god of war let loose a shriek, roaring thunderous loud as 9,000-10,000 combat soldiers shriek with Ares' fury when massive armies clash. A shudder swept all ranks, Trojans and Argives both, terror-struck by the shriek the god let loose. Ares, whose lust for slaughter never dies. End quote.